Chitra Ravi. I am the founder and CEO of this organization called EZ Vidya, headquartered at Chennai. We work with hundreds of schools across the country in areas of teacher training, curriculum development, and also work with corporates in enabling their social responsibility projects in education succeed in the field.
Hi, I'm Balasubrahmanian. Also work in EZ Vidya, and my work specifically involves training and consulting.
So we basically recognize that the learner today in the 21st century, thanks to technology explosion, has changed. So we understand this learner or endeavor to understand this learner and are very keen to create a learning environment which will cater to this learner and also build in him essential skills to face the challenges of the 21st century. And in that we take an approach that education or learning in schools, in formal school settings, needs to be very engaging for the learner and engage the learner, as well as has to have certain very effective outcome-based transactions.
First of all, we believe that assessment is very tightly linked to the teaching and learning process itself. So it is not separate from teaching, and that it must be seamlessly integrated into the way a teacher teaches, and that every step in the learning process must be throwing open insights, inputs about the learner to the teacher. And these insights and inputs could be of various kinds. The most rudimentary being whether the child is understanding what I want him to understand, in the sense that are these outcomes being achieved, and also about the child's personality. So what other facets of the child can I understand? So as to what provisions we have made for assessment, we have something called a studio, which is the primary learning resource that is given to the child. It is an equivalent of a textbook in the sense that we replace the textbook with the studio. The key difference here being that the studio is a very interactive material, in the sense that the concept that is to be taught to the child is unraveled through a series of questions, dialogues, activities, and problems and so on, through which the child learns. And at each of these points, the child is actually responding to certain questions, or in a sense dialoguing with the studio, quite literally.
Now this is a class 3 lesson on, like the title says, it's weather and season. This is a part of what we call a studio, which is a textbook replacement. Essentially what a studio aspires to do is integrate pedagogy into the student material itself, and make it very interactive, so that a lot of learning ideas, concepts are sort of derived from the child's understanding, from the child's from the discussions that happen in classroom, and so on and so forth. So if you look at this, typically it says go through the maze and guess the weather of the day. So when they go through this maze, they'll probably see the hat and the watermelon and so on and so forth, and they'll guess the weather of the day, and then they're asked to draw a symbol to represent the weather of the day as well. So every child does it in his or her own way.
So we are hoping that the studio, over a period of a year, emerges as a portfolio of the child, where the child is constantly penning down, maybe painting, writing, putting down various thoughts. And this becomes a rich source of assessing the child. So there are, every page in the studio, we look at it as an opportunity for the teacher to understand the child better. As far as the teacher is concerned, we also have teacher materials where there are certain specific components related to assessment. One of them being that the outcome of every topic being taught is very clearly defined, as well as there is an attempt to define how this outcome could be assessed in the studio itself. That's one of them. And then there are also various other aspects, like I was mentioning, the child's ability to reflect, to work with others, to relate ideas with the real world, which can also be gauged from the studio. These are sort of documented in the teacher materials. Like I said, the studio is a whole lot of questions and provisions for interactivity. The challenge lies in helping the teacher look at it as a mode of assessment rather than a question or an activity that needs to be completed, because we traditionally come from a very textbook driven culture where if there are 12 lessons, then these need to be completed within the year, and that remains even when we replace the textbook with the studio. So the first attempt here is to help the teacher understand that these are not just things to be completed, but these are things that are going to help you understand your children better. That's one of the major aspects.
This is the start of the lesson, and one child calls it, the question that we've asked is, what is the weather of the day? And one child says sunny and the other child says summer. And summer happens to be a season. And this is something that through the lesson we try to clarify. So one of the things we try to tell the teacher is that you've already figured that there are children who've not been able to distinguish between weather and season. And so you might have to bear that in mind as you go through this lesson. In a similar fashion, I'm just going to run you through a few more. This kind of question we ask, we call it a look within question. So it's usually closely related to the subject, but it also tries to understand the child's preference. So if you look at it, name your favorite season and what do you like most about the season. So one child says summer, and then we can eat ice creams. So the child associates summer with eating ice creams. Spring, because the trees will have the teacher has made some corrections. Trees will grow, flowers, all plants will grow. Winter, cool wind. Summer, I will go to my village and I will go swimming and I will play. This child possibly associates summer with summer vacations and going away from the usual setting and so on and so forth. But again, if you look at it, the idea of asking a what do you like about the season also could give us some insight into the child's understanding of seasons itself. So when a child says that in winter, I like winter because there is cool wind in winter, it's pretty obvious that he or she has understood what winter means. At the same time, if you look at it also, the other aspect that we've been talking about, one of our teachers happened to mention the other day that I'm getting to know my children a lot better through these little nuggets, like going away for summer vacations or liking ice creams. She says that when I know these little facets of my children, my relationship with my children is growing stronger by the day, and I'm sure we'll all agree that obviously is going to promote better learning.
I think also this whole framework is built with the schools that we work with in mind, which is average schools with say 40 in a class. So the whole thing is about empowering this teacher to use these tools as a very effective assessment tool. So that's the challenge that we are talking about, which means a very strong empowerment of the teacher happens, and she uses these tools effectively in her diagnosis of the child's learning, rather than just testing the child and giving her a grade.
In one of the lessons in class 2, in the subject called EVS, we talk about the community, and we talk about the various people, the people who help us in the community. So we introduce children to the postman, the milkman, and all those things. And there was this. I was in a class where there is this particular activity from the studio that the teacher was facilitating at that point in time. At the end of that class, the teacher actually came to me and said, today is the first time I've realized that my students, I very clearly realized that my students simply didn't understand this idea of distinguishing between people who come to our place, our house, and help us, and people where we have to go. So sometimes I have to go out to a doctor, but there are some people who come over to my place, and the children couldn't understand this. To me, this was interesting because the teacher was able to reflect on the fact that until now she had been teaching without really looking for evidences of understanding. The evidence would come in the examination, which was usually terminal in nature.
And limited.
And very limited in the way it tests the students. And therefore there's not much she could do about it. So when we carried on the conversation, so I said, so what are we going to do about it? She said, I'm going to think about another way of, teaching the same idea over again tomorrow, which may not have happened in a class where this activity and which came out from the studio was not there.
So we are surprised that the teacher becomes a very reflective practitioner when given such assessment tools. So it's not teaching and testing, but it's a continuous process of providing opportunities for children to express, and those expressions become a comprehensive evaluation tool and an evaluation of herself as a teacher too.